Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Dr. Alan Hyde, and today we're joined by a special guest who is here to talk to us about kink, different types of alternative relationships, what we were laughing about before in the terms of a two-person push-up, and we'll get into all these kind of things. But today we're joined by Iris Muscarella, licensed professional counselor associate. Thank you so much for joining us today, Iris.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. It was fun laughing and chatting about some of the terms we can use on YouTube around.
Yeah. We're living in a very censored time. And so having special words, secret words.
Right.
I feel like it's like Pee-wee's Playhouse. Like, you said the special word,
Yeah, or a speakeasy.
Yeah. Making whoopee.
Right.
Come on in.
Yeah. So we're going to get into all this, your background. You've been educating on things like, healthy expressions within the realms of making whoopee and getting down to business on some of these topics. And we're excited to be educated here on some of these things and hopefully ask some good questions to pull some information out. But why don't you give us and our listeners a background of just kind of what got you into working with these things and where it's kind of taken you on your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, I'm a type A overachiever. And so I can't just be a part of a community. I have to take a leadership role in some way or study it in some way. So I have been a part of these communities for a long time. So I have been a part of the spicy, schmexy community for 23 years. Can we say kink?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
I guess we could always Google the term on that.
Yeah. So, I've been a part of the kink community for 23 years. I started doing education on it because I saw a lot of things happen that I wasn't okay with and that I felt like weren't a part of the principles of kink. And so I started doing education on it, especially as a woman of color and, working with people of color who wanted to be a part of that community. So I started doing that 15 years ago. And then I came into polyamory about 13 years ago. Also noticed some similar things, kind of got pulled into doing education, actually by a former therapist, who was my therapist. She was like, you just have all this information, you should do education. And so I started doing education. I did a presentation, which then led to me doing podcasts, which then led to me doing keynote speaking. And it just kind of took off from there. At about the same time, I was doing a lot of education on intimacy and connection. And so I started doing a lot of education on that and in spots where I saw that people struggled. And I had all this information, and I'm autistic, so I like hyperfixate and study things until I know everything, right? And then keep looking because there's no way to know everything. So it kind of came naturally. And then I noticed that it was really hard to find a therapist who understood these things like deeply, was educated about them, like not just knew the surface level stuff, and to find people who weren't judgmental, to find a therapist I didn't have to educate about my life. And so that really lit a fire for me, and that like I wanted to be that person. And so then 2020 hit. I had way too much time to think. And so, of course, I did what was healthy, and I filled my schedule up with school and went back to school, got my bachelor's in psychology with a minor in LGBTQ studies, and then decided, like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And so I went and got my master's degree, and I graduated last July. And even in internship, I had a full schedule. People were looking for people like me. And I've been very fortunate that people share my information, in my communities and know that I'm a safe person. So I've been able to already start my own practice and work completely for myself. And I love my clients. They're amazing, and the trust that they give. But I also see the relief when they say a term and I don't ask what that means, right?
Sure.
Or they, a lot of my clients come from referrals from other people in the communities all over the state of Texas. And so, I'm very trusted, and that means a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as we get into the discussion today, what I love on this show is like for the viewers or anybody watching, it's like it, hate it, disagree with it, don't understand it, afraid of change, afraid of people's differences, whatever it is. These are real discussions that are occurring. These are real people who are having experiences in their own rights. And we want to know about it and hear from the professionals who are working with it, because I don't work with everything, and I don't work with this as a background. And so one of the things I think first to ask is like, I imagine most adults who watch this will understand and have some kind of definition in their head of what kink is. I would much rather hear a definition from you and just some education on like, how are you working with it, and what should people maybe following along today be aware of in the realm of that definition that you would provide?
Yeah, I mean, kink is such a varied experience, right? Like, there's no like one set definition, but I think it's anything that moves outside of the traditional, like, quote unquote, vanilla, schmexy time, right? Where it's just like, intimacy and connection within a two-party experience, right? So that could be anything from like, I think when most people think about kink, they think about impact, right? They think about sub-slave situations or master slave situations, but it's so much more than that, right?
Well, I even as I hear that, I imagine, the lady clutching her pearls, right? Like thinking about the scary things that she might hear on TV or see on social media.
Yes, yeah. And I think some people are a lot more open to it. They saw 50 Shades of Grey, which is a horrible representation of kink. There's so much consent not happening there, right? But, I think people became more open to it. And I think also with the advent of spicy adult films being more available to people, they've become more interested in maybe some not so healthy ideas of these things, right? Because when you do have those spicy adult films, often there is a lot of violence in them, and that violence is often put towards, people assigned female at birth, and so like, there's this idea that everybody's supposed to like having their hair pulled and being spanked and degraded and things like that, right? That's just a kind of a common thing, right? But not everybody likes that, and that's okay, right? And kink is not always that, right? Kink is sometimes praise kinks. I want to tell you you're being a really good girl and you're doing the things that you're supposed to do, and I want to reward you, and it could be in that caretaking role, right? That can be a part of kink. Kink doesn't always have to feel like violence, sometimes it can feel like love. And there's different ways to do that. Some people have 24/7 dynamics because they're bad at boundaries, and they need somebody to hold them accountable. Some people struggle with mental issues or mental disabilities or things like that, that aren't so severe that like it keeps them from being able to live a normal life, but they do struggle with, even people with ADHD, like they struggle with getting things done. And so having an outside source that like makes sure that they do them and make sure that there's punishments if they don't. And the punishments don't always have to be harsh, right? It could just be like, hey, you don't get to go out this weekend because, you didn't do your chores or you didn't do what you're supposed to do, right? And like sometimes that can be really healing for people who didn't have caretakers that had structure for them, or, who didn't have consequences to their actions and now they don't know how to adult, So there's all different ways to do kink. There is no like one set way, and it doesn't always include violence. And more often than not, it includes checking in, it includes aftercare, it includes love, and it can be a really healing experience to have.
I think there's something to be said too, just kind of observationally with society, that there is a lot of very isolated, quiet, and disconnected violence that occurs that I think we can all see. It's like in recent light of just really tragic things that were happening this last couple weeks. Just whether it's the big stuff you see on social media or people getting shot in their homes or stabbed on a train, it's like there's a lot of really isolated, disconnected violence that I do think that the realms of intimacy and physical intimacy being in the media has played a role in the way that it's portrayed. And so hearing from a therapist on just kind of like the ways I imagine that most adjusted people want to view these things and probably do view these things, but then are told to view them a different way. And then that causes these conflicts and like, well, am I supposed to be this? And well, I'm not getting a lot of action anyway, and blah, 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 blah. It creates conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it's hard to suss through what's actually good information and what just feels good because of your informational bias.
Right.
So, like, if you want to truly believe that all the people who experience any kind of kink are depraved, awful perverts, then, like, hey, fine, you can yuck someone's yum all you want to, but at the end of the day, like, it's not going to stop them from what they're doing, right? And I find it so interesting to see how things have manifested recently. There is this big divide, and something I see very often coming up in social media is very much like the glorification of like the trad wife and like some of the things they've been talking about. And I find this very interesting, and they're talking about being submissive and subservient, and they have things they need to do. And they're even talking about, oh, I wear like a necklace or something like that to like signify that like my partner has this like dominance over me, which is actually very almost completely parallel to a 24/7 caretaker dynamic in kink and wearing a day collar, right? But if you like bring that up to them, they're like, no, it's nothing like that, because there is this inherent judgment about kink, right? And so it's like, if you want to be a trad wife, like, go for it, girl, do you? You want to wear a day collar? Great. I love that for you. As long as everybody's consenting and going into it with full knowledge of what they're agreeing to.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of phenomenon on social media around all of the different ways these things get talked about. It's like sometimes we'll do TikTok reactions where we'll break down kind of people talking about codependency or things around the family disease of addiction. And there's I imagine, right, the parallel for us would be like when you look at some of the conversations on kink and trad wives and the social media trends, it's like, ooh, there's a lot of information here that could use some more compassion and care. And that's the world we're living in, is a lot of pseudo professionals running around and giving feedback advice on things that are not their expertise or specialty, which, hey, look, if that's what you want to do, you do you, boo boo, like we were saying before. But we're going to counter it with proper information, which
Absolutely.
I like.
Yeah, absolutely. You should always be able to back up with, something that is scientifically backed, right? Like peer reviewed, scientifically backed, like it's not just something I'm saying, right? And I think some things are experiential. I think there's some things that science hasn't touched yet, it's rare, but, I think there is some things, right? And so there's some things that you're going to have that are experiential, but you have to understand, like, that's your experience, right? And that may not be a universal experience for everyone else, right? And I think that anytime we have anything that feels divisive, we have to understand that there are going to be predators in those spaces, right? Like no matter what it is, whether it's kink or the church, right? Like people use divisive spaces to find victims sometimes because, they feel like there's a structure there that they can exploit. And it doesn't matter what the structure is, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, it is important that, people who do have educations in it are able to come in and say, like, hey, I see where they're coming from here. However, that's not backed up by science, or that's not backed up by the information that we currently have. And I'm not, invalidating their experience, but their experience isn't the experience of everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like being able to decipher between empirical research and anecdotal experiences.
Absolutely.
Which are anecdotal experiences are valuable when someone is coming to you to ask for feedback. I think a lot of times it ends up coming out in the way of advice, right? Which is a tricky thing with social media.
Yeah.
Right. And we toe that line here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we have to really see people as individuals, right? And like, even if we have an experience what they experience, we still have to hear them and like validate, yeah, that thing did happen to you and it did make you feel this way. And then we have to work with them on an individual level. But should we be putting that on social media as like, this is everybody's experience and you all need to have this experience? Like, no, And I think we live in a culture of like pop psychology right now, right? Where people get terms and they really overuse them. And like one of the ones that I think is a really good example of that is Jonah Hill, when he posted, like his girlfriend posted their conversation where he was like, she's a professional surfer. She was when they met. And he's like, well, you can't surf with guys and, you can't wear bikinis anymore. And, like you can't hang out with your single friends. And these are my boundaries, right? I'm like, that's not a boundary. That's a rule. Yeah, right? Like that's a rule. So, like I do a class on like building healthier polycules, right? And one of the things I talk about, what's the difference between a boundary, an agreement, and a rule? And most people don't know. right?
So let's slow this down for a moment, because this was something I had asked you about before we got started, and I think that anyone following along who likes this information, some of them obviously are going to know what that term is. I'd like to be educated on polycules, what that term is, what it means, what it looks like, and I'm sure there are plenty of our listeners who, hearing that, they're like, what is she talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. So a polycule is a term used in polyamory, in which it is the connection between like romantic and sometimes non-romantic relationships that creates the community in which you're connected, right? So, for example, let's say that you and I were partners. And then you had two other partners, right? Those two people would be my metamors, or for short, we call them metas. But we would all be a part of a polycule. We're all connected. And maybe I would have two romantic partners and then I have a platonic life partner, right? So the definition is changing because now we're also including platonic life partner. It doesn't have to be romantic, but this is a significant relationship in my life, right? And so then they would also be a part of the polycule, right? And so it's the connections in which we make for like long-term reasons, right? And they typically are romantic, but they don't have to be romantic in nature.
Let me, as we kick it around, let me just ask you the questions that come up in my gut as somebody who's open-minded, but has the way in that I do it in my life, right? I've seen the family trees, right? Kind of like when you're maybe making the agreements and things like that. As a clinician, is there ever a moment, and this is me just kind of kicking around questions in my mind, to like set parameters on how big that tree gets, or like, are these just like flowing? It could be like hundreds of people. I guess I'm curious, how does that get monitored? Is that even something in the agreement that you're even interested in monitoring? How does all that work?
Some people do, some people don't. I think there is definitely this like space of autonomy and agency within like polyamory often, which is like trying not to limit other people just because of your own limitations, right? Whether that's insecurity, whether that's jealousy, whether that's discomfort, whether that's not what you would do, kind of thing. I think it's very much you self-limit, right? Like it's about focus on the self and saying, what am I open and available for? And is this working for me, right? And so, I talk a lot about resources when I teach my classes. And it's like, what are your resources that you currently have available? And how much of those resources are being used by your current relationship with yourself and your romantic partners? And then what do you have left over, if anything? And if you feel like you have something left over to give, then that might be a good space. Like, yeah, maybe I could have another connection if it happened, right? I don't have to actively seek it out just because I have it, right? I don't have to use all my resources, right? But it's like, I think it's kind of like you have to self-govern here, right? You have to say what works for you. And like polycules can get very big because each person is allowed to have like their own partners and like their experiences and all that stuff. So it can get big. It doesn't always get big. Sometimes it does, but and people are different in their connections, right? So like there may be a lot of like peripheral or satellite relationships that are happening outside of your polycule, but you're only really close to like 2 or 3 people, and those are the people that you hang out with. Or you could be parallel, in which you don't hang out with any of them. You hang out with your partner and you don't hang out with anybody else, right? So it's really like self-governing. You get to decide what connections you make, how deep you want those connections to be, and how much time and resources you want to put towards them. So there's no real way to say like, there's a limit or this is the limit. It's for you. You decide for you what you are open and available for.
Yeah. So basically it's like any other relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That, these are the things too, like being an open-minded dude, like kind of like people would look at me and be like, pretty traditional dude, right? Yeah. I've always had an open mind with these kind of things, that other people are interested in this stuff. And I just, anytime I've ever had like clients back when I worked in treatment centers, it's just like, really the parameters and the boundaries for you individually would be the same as if we were talking about a monogamous relationship.
Absolutely.
It's about the self-protection, the boundaries for you, and making sure that your adult needs are taken care of as you seek to meet your adult wants.
Absolutely.
It's just, it looks different for you than it does for me.
Yeah. The only difference is I'm not requiring sexual fidelity, right? Or emotional fidelity even, right? And so like there is a lot of different ways to do non-monogamy. Some people do swinging, some people do open relationships, some people do like hot wife or, I don't think I can say the other word on here, but it rhymes with cluck,
Oh, yeah.
there's all different ways to do it. And some people do polyamory in which they want those like multiple commitments, and so there's all different ways to do it. And you have to decide like what works for you and what you are and are not willing to have in your life, right?
Do you find a lot of people, they'll seek you out and then they're involved in it and they're realizing like, what have I done? Do you find some of that comes in through your office?
I think that just happens in relationships in general,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Like I think some people like the idea of things, but the reality of them is different, right? I
Yeah.
think some people think to themselves, like, I want to be a husband and a father, but they think of the roles and not the responsibilities,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they think, oh, it'd be great to have my own children and to have a wife, but they don't think what's required of me in this situation, right? Or people think, hey, I think it'd be amazing to be poly. I want two hot girlfriends who like each other, and then we're gonna close it, But like that's not reality sometimes, right? Sometimes you and your partner are not going to like the same person, or that person doesn't want to be closed, or they don't want a one penis policy. Like there's all kinds of things that go into this, right? And so sometimes the idea of something is better than the reality of it, which then leads you to come to me because you thought it was going to be a certain way and then it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think the responsibility aspect that you highlight. This is that crossroads for any adult. I thought the point you were making, because I see it with the issues I work with, where most people, let's say in addictions, they love the idea of things.
Mm-hmm.
Action is the answer,
Mm-hmm.
and that's always responsibilities and accountability. That's what you're going to run into no matter what. And so, in the realm of different types of expressions of relationships, I think calling attention there is most important. It's like there may be young people who come across this who are interested for the first time. I have a client who right now is kind of questioning a little bit of his sexuality, and we're staying really open to help him explore, like, you don't have to be so rigid with yourself on like, you have to have an answer. It's like, sometimes the reality is, where are you at right now, and being honest with where you are right now versus trying to force something that you think will fit, because you're never going to take responsibility for something that you think will fit because it's a fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. And also understand that you're different people with different people, right? So like maybe in a past relationship, this wouldn't have been it because you struggled to get your needs met, right? But maybe in another relationship, you get your needs met amazingly, like you're in surplus, like, and so maybe then that's like, oh yeah, if they wanted to have another partner, I'd be fine with that. I'm getting all my needs met, like, and maybe not, right? I think that on some ways, I think about polyamory as like a relationship orientation in the same way sexuality is, right? It can be a fluid experience, or it could be something that I'm made for this particular thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's for a lot of people who I talk to who are queer, they're like, oh, I knew I was gay when I was 4, like I knew it, and so for some people, they've always kind of questioned the idea of monogamy and if that fit, right? But maybe have felt shamed because like that's not the norm, right? That makes them abnormal. And in the same way that you can decide you're polyamorous and try it and have a great time and then meet somebody and decide to be monogamous, like there is no like set way to do anything, right? Like as you grow, as you change, as your brain develops, as your opinions change, other things may seem more in alignment with who you are now than who you were 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, and I think it's just like, it's a good perspective too, because we live in a modern time where, gosh, how would I put this? I'll just be very direct. It's like you can get a 50-year-old dude who's on his 4th divorce, but he's had 100 girlfriends over his lifespan, and he's going to judge the way someone else is in a relationship.
Yeah.
And women do the same, right? It's not, or non-binary people. It's like people who are on the judgment side of things are the ones really, I think, in these realms we'd want to invite in with compassion, right? To a place of understanding, because there's so much, like, you just look at divorce rates, right? And in our culture, no matter what state that you're in, and nobody really has any wiggle room to be talking about how other people should be or shouldn't be in relation, because people aren't really relating to each other very well these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think sometimes I see the people who are the most judgmental, who have the less space to judge, right? The least space to judge. It's like, oh, you've had 4 marriages, but you're against gay marriage, and it's like, I want to the tradition of marriage. Well, the tradition of marriage is you get married one time and that's it for the rest. And that was the first person you ever slept with. That's the tradition of marriage. Or you get sold, like your father decided that this family was a good family to make connections with, and you got sold and you're married and you have babies, but you don't really talk to each other. Like there's lots of traditions of marriage, right? So we're just deciding which one we want to uphold based on what makes us feel superior sometimes, right? And so for someone, something I hear often from people, oh, I could never do polyamory. I'm too jealous. I'm like, wow, you should really explore that with yourself and where that's coming from, right? Like, jealousy is not a good feeling to have in a relationship and not a good emotion. It's not helpful in any way, right? So it's like, are you not getting your needs met? Do you not feel secure in your relationship? Like, is this coming from fear? Is it coming from an unmet need that you feel all of this jealousy in your relationship? Like, maybe that's something you should explore with yourself, and maybe that would help you have a healthier monogamous relationship if you didn't feel like something outside of your relationship was more of a danger to your relationship than what's inside of it.
That's a really, really solid point. I mean, there's a real softening process too. Like when I started my work as a dude, right? It's like I was a bull in a china shop, jealous, insecure, right?
Yeah.
There was a real softening process that still occurs to this day, where like the vulnerability of like intimacy, right, with another person. It requires us to be patient, to be open-minded, to hear other people out. And I'm thinking about it as you were describing from the monogamous perspective. It's like, if you can't have those things in a relationship, then there is going to be threats to your relationship. And that would, I imagine, be exactly the same for anybody in any other type of expression of a relationship. And we're human beings. We have very similar experiences in the way that we interpret the world. There's just so many vast expressions of how that then branches out. And anytime you branch out, people have judgments. And the good news is let them, right?
Yeah.
That's the best news about boundaries. It's like, let somebody have a judgment. That doesn't mean anything about you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I don't have to live my life based on someone else's judgments. Like, oh my God, the hoops I would be jumping through if I cared about everybody's opinion. Like, I care about my opinion, right? I care about what makes me happy and what works for me. And as long as everybody's consenting and everybody's an adult, that's our business, and like what I do in my private time and in my bedroom and in my like intimate relationships is my business, I think if more people thought that way, they'd be happier, right? Because we see a lot of people speak very strongly against certain lifestyles and certain choices, and then come to find out they're closeted, and like they just really hated themselves because they were taught to, right? Versus like if they had just like learned to love themselves and been taught to love themselves, and no matter what form they were coming in and what form they loved, they would have lived a happier life.
Yeah, maybe some peace, right? Serenity.
Yeah. I think the other thing is people think that as a poly person, I don't experience judgment, or not judgment, but jealousy. And I do. I experience it. It's just not the star of the show. It's just the beginning of a conversation, right? Like if I experience jealousy, then I'm like, okay, where is this coming from? Is it an unmet need or is it a fear? And then I like do the Socratic method with myself. Okay, let's go through that. Let's see where it is. And then I come up with a solution. So it's like, hey, I noticed that you did this with this person, and I mentioned that that's something I'd be really interested in, and then we didn't do it, and you did it with somebody else. And it made me feel really like discounted in your life, and like it wasn't important to you that I wanted to do that. So can we talk about it, right? Or like, hey, like I've noticed that you're experiencing like a lot of new relationship energy with this other person, and like you're talking to them all the time, and like even during our dates you're like texting them, and that makes me feel like really not loved and unseen. And so like I really want to talk about that and maybe draw some like agreements around our time together so that I feel important to you too, right? And like maybe I'm having this fear that you'll like them more than me, or that I'll get abandoned. So can you just reassure me that that's not the case, right? So it's like, jealousy is the beginning of a conversation. It's just not the end all be all.
Yeah, hardly ever is it the end all be all. It's the reaction. And we want to find the response and slow things down, which I imagine, right? Well, to define in a simple term, as you guys follow along, right, as Iris had mentioned, Socratic questioning, right? It's like drilling down to the
Yeah.
meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
And you do a little bit of that. You were mentioning that you've done some short TikToks, and those following along on TikTok, you can see Iris. She's tagged there. Her information will be in the bios everywhere. But why don't you give us a little bit of rundown of what the agreements kind of look like? They're different for everybody.
Yeah.
We're picking up on that part, but just kind of how you would walk a client through what an agreement would look like for all kinds of different things in your sessions.
So my own special brand of autism is structure. I love a structure. I love a document. So like, and I think having things written down is really helpful, especially when you're dealing with neurodivergent clients who may have ADHD and problems with memory or, you know, anything else, right? So like having something written down, having a document that's a living, breathing document, right? So I do a lot of documents in my work, and the agreement is every 6 months we come back to it. And we make sure that the agreements that we made are still working, right? And so I do relationship contracts where we go over structures, we go over any kind of dynamics that may affect outside relationships, right? So like if you have children together and you have to worry about childcare, if you share finances, if you cohabitate, if you have a DS relationship, you know, all kinds of things,
What's
right?
a DS relationship?
It's a dom-sub relationship.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
so
guess
like,
I could have deduced.
no, it's okay. Yeah, it's a dom-sub relationship. So like if you have a 24/7 kink relationship, or if you have like a relationship that is a DS relationship only in play spaces, are there like spaces that are like sacred to this particular relationship, or what are the community spaces? What does that look like as far as like transparency and letting people giving informed consent? What does that look like for like STI testing? What does that look like for new partners? How soon do I want to know if you're like on the apps looking, or do I only want to know when you go on a date, or do I not want to know anything, right? What's our structure? Are we, you know, egalitarian or hierarchical, or, you know, what are we looking at here, right? And so really sitting down and talking about, do we want to have like a kitchen table situation in which everybody hangs out and they're friendly towards each other, or do we want parallel? I don't want to know about your other relationships except for these following things, right? So it's like really sitting down and like breaking it down and putting it down on paper and having agreements together, right? I do some that are like safe sex agreements, in which you talk about how often is everybody getting tested. If you're going to sleep with somebody new, how recent do their test results need to be? What are our agreements on barriers? What do we consider schmecks, right? You know, like what's that, right? Like making sure that we have an agreement, right? I do some breakup and de-escalation ones. I kind of do it like a prenup, like, hey, while we're all happy, let's talk about if things were to end, how would we do that, right? What would that look like? And have that agreement. It's not legally and binding, right? But it's like, at least we're doing it when we're like each other the most, right? And doing things like fair fight agreements, right? So, you know, I'm sure what you deal with a lot if you deal with like relationships is communication. Like, how do we best communicate with each other? What are our triggers? What are our deal breakers? What are the rules of engagement? What are we going to do if one of the rules of engagement gets broken? You know, what's the plan of action? What do our cool down periods look like? Do we have safe words? You know, like all kinds of stuff, right? So like really breaking it down so that there's something to refer back to and there's a structure in place. Because like a lot of times with relationship, we're just kind of figuring it out, and sometimes we're just doing what was modeled for us, whether it's healthy or not, right?
Yeah.
And so really trying to figure out like, how can we do this in a healthy way, and how can we have something to refer back to?
Yeah. I mean, any type of healing process requires an inventory. You know, if you got the moldy food in the back, you got to get it out.
You got to get it out, yeah.
Yeah, and you got to know what your chain is, what the system is, how is it working, how am I interacting within it. This is not just true for relationships. It's true for recovery. It's true for your mental health. It's true for your job. Structure is very, very important. And I like that breakdown that you gave. I mean, I could see that being helpful for a lot of people who tend to be very logical or regimented, not rigid, but regimented. I think there's a vast number of people in society who appreciate structure, especially because of some of the things you were mentioning is like, well, I crave it. I didn't have it. And if you know, it's like you spend any time around kids, you realize real quick how much in the inborn nature of a human desires structure, predictability.
And that builds safety and comfort, right?
Yeah. It allows for unpredictability.
Yeah. And so it's like, and it allows for also too, sometimes the big things that we need to get out the way, like, hey, no yelling, no screaming, no insulting, like no mocking, things like that. Once we get those big things out the way, we can start to see where the little cracks are. Right. And go, because often like we'll get the big things out the way and my clients will come in and go, oh my God, something happened this week we need to talk about. Like, it seems like a little thing, but I realize it drives me crazy. And so then we talk about it. Right. Like, but it's like, we got to get those like big things out the way. And I think very few of us have really good models for what healthy models of love and conflict look like.
I think that's a very fair statement. I don't think we would have jobs and as many therapists that do have jobs with full caseloads if there was just like the best models of parenting running around. And it's also a good call out too, because a lot of times, whether it's monogamous relationships, polyamorous relationships, or anything of the sort, anytime we're relating to people and they come into a therapeutic setting, the first thing that always gets uncovered is like, have you guys talked about this?
Yeah.
And it's like, for those listening along who are thinking about therapy, it's like, that's not a judgment. This is just a base for a lot of people. Our society is, if it was the best at anything in the world, it would be not talking. That's the one thing that our society is very good at. Is like functioning without talking.
Especially in the South, there's a lot of like, hush, hush, don't talk about that we don't talk about that, and I find that, I'm sure you find it in addiction too, with the family dynamics, that like what happens in the family is a secret. It stays in the family. We don't talk about it outside the family. The best thing is that we look perfect. We don't have to be perfect, but we have to look perfect, right? And so a lot of things don't get talked about, and we don't have healthy models for, love and attachment and conflict. And, we don't have great ways to communicate our feelings, A lot of the work that I do is getting people in touch with like how to communicate their feelings, like I do, like for my relationships, I do like weekly check-ins, and I have these feelings and needs cards that I've created for them. And so they go around, they talk about what were the top 3 feelings they had this week. And, what are the things that they have coming up, and what are their needs for the week coming up, and how their partner can support them in that, right? And that is just a conversation, like most of them feel so uncomfortable having at first because they just never knew how to do that before.
Right. Yeah, it really, I guess we could say simple, but I think in the vein of empathy and compassion, right, or just sympathy for our fellow human being, is like, these things they're so simple that it gets complicated. And we're here to help you unpack those things in all the different multitudes of ways that we approach problems. But it does get easier. And I like that that's the message so seamlessly through what you're sharing about, is like, you can come in with the most complex problem in your mind or relationship type of dynamic, and we can sort this out. It's really not the end of the world.
And I think the great thing about polyamory that I really love about it, and I hate about it also, is that it magnifies you. Anything that you have going on, it's going to show it to you in multiples, right? So it's like, if one person says like, oh my God, every time we argue, you talk over me and like you really dismiss what I'm saying and you just respond and you don't listen, you're like, that can't be true, right? Like you can choose in your mind to believe that's not true. But when you have 2 or 3 people telling you, and then they get together and they talk to each other and they go, do they do that to you? Yeah, they do it to me too. Like, let's talk to them. Let's have an intervention about how they do this to all of us and how it makes us feel dismissed, right? They're like, have multiple partners, it'd be fun, until they gang up on you, right? And so it's like, it really magnifies all of your good behaviors and all of your bad behaviors. And so you really get a like magnified view of yourself and your habits when you're doing polyamory. It's a very amazing thing to have. It's an amazing tool to have if you're willing to hear it and evolve and change.
Yeah, like any community.
It's
like when I work with an alcoholic, or I work with a family member of someone who has an addiction, and they get themselves into the rooms of 12 steps, it's like, now all of a sudden you're around people who understand, because they used to behave the way you used to behave.
Absolutely.
You can't escape it anymore. And I've always kind of appreciated the concept of, you don't tend to see the world for the way it actually is. You tend to see the world for the way that you are. Right. So when someone is reflecting to you and holding up a mirror, of course, our first reaction is like, well, that's not the way I see it. It's like, okay, well, what we're called to do as human beings is to not try to just stop at the way that you see it, but to appreciate the way that other people might see it and see how that fits.
Yeah.
And especially in the realm of any type of relationship, it's like if you want to connect with this person, you better be willing to hear feedback.
Yes.
Because nothing will push anyone away faster than like, I don't really care what you have to say. I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
So, okay, then why are we going to connect at all any further than that?
Yeah. Why am I here? Yeah. And everything that we do does affect people, and I do love the sense of community that comes with kink, that comes with poly, that comes with anything that is an alternative lifestyle, right? Even sex workers have found amazing ways to communicate with each other on clients that may be problematic or who may hurt them, and that is so censored and limited that they have had to find such creative ways to do that, right? But there is this sense of community in which like you understand that like what happens doesn't just affect you, it affects your entire community. And there is this like beholdenness to communicate these things and talk about these things so that your community can be safe. Even if something bad happened to you, you want to make sure it doesn't happen to other people.
Yeah, and you're certainly working with the populations that would make people clutch their pearls.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about our society has been impacted. I think, I guess we could say that the traditional view of it is that things like sex work and pornography, the oldest profession, if you will, has impacted our society in I think most people would say negative ways, but let's break it down. What are you seeing? You're working with these populations. What should people know about how individuals in those realms are affected and the ways in which they're taking care of themselves?
Yeah, I think a lot of sex workers go through a lot of trauma and they don't have anywhere to go to talk about it because like in some places that work, may be considered illegal maybe, or that they fear they're going to, have judgment on them for what they do, especially if they do something that's very niche or maybe controversial or whatever the case may be, but it's still like consenting adults, right? And I think they experience not just like trauma within like sometimes their experiences as sex workers, but also in the judgment that they receive from other people, like feeling like they have to hide and be secretive and not tell people, or that people aren't going to want to be friends with them or, be partners with them or whatever the case may be, right? And that this may follow them later on in life, right? But like sex work has been around as long as humans been around, right?
Yeah.
It's the oldest profession in the world, and you can't blame people who are creating a supply as long as the demand is so high. I think that a lot of people like to judge things in the front while keeping dirty things in their hands in the back, right?
Always.
Oh, I would never do that, but meanwhile, you check their computer, there's a whole lot of stuff on there, right? It's like, so, I mean, I think that, we have this very conservative view of sex work and think that people are being pushed into it and that, they don't want to do it or they don't enjoy their jobs or that, they are being trafficked or they have a pimp or, any of these things. And some of those things are true. And there are people who do have those experiences, but some people aren't. Some people are doing it because they genuinely enjoy it, right?
Well, those are the sensationalized aspects of it that, of course, that's where people are going to stop. They hear the sensational side of things. They don't think about the human being. It's kind of like with the addict. It's like hate the disease, not the person. Even if they are doing the sensational stuff, that's still a human being. And, there are people there who are going to support them and understand them. But I think it really is, at the end of the day, brass tacks. As I hear you share it, it's like that's the ultimate point that I would like to drill on is like, you can judge the supply. It's those who have the demand that, I guess I would say at brass tacks, is where the conversation really is.
Absolutely.
It's who is looking with demand for these things in that realm. They're not typically, until it's real bad, coming to realms like this. They're not the types of customers we see typically.
No, and like sex work is difficult work, like they have to promote themselves, they have to market themselves, they have to, be photographers and videographers and editors, and they have to like release so much at a time. You doing a podcast, you understand like engagement is difficult, and so like they have to do all that stuff, and often when I hear people like say something like, oh, you know, sex work is just easy. They're just being lazy. And like, have you ever tried to get like a really good picture of like you're down there, like with the right lighting and everything? It is difficult, right? You know, like that is not easy work, right? You know, and even if you enjoy your work, sometimes it's still difficult, right? You know, and so, and my work, I get to the most intimate parts of people. You know, they tell me everything about their life and like we get into some nitty gritty things, but I love my job and it's fulfilling.
Yeah.
And like they do too, and they love their job and it's fulfilling for them. And when it's not, they leave, you know? And so I think that we do need to pay attention to trafficking. I think we do need to pay attention to like a lot of children. I mean, Dallas, I think is what, number 2 or number 3 in
Oh, it's
child
way up there.
trafficking.
It's way up there.
DC's number 1. Maybe we should be paying attention to things like that, right? What's the
real conversations?
Yeah, you
how
know,
do we keep kids safe?
Yeah, and so I don't think we're having those conversations. I think we keep moving on and blaming other people instead of looking at the things that actually endanger children, that actually do cause trafficking, right? You know, and I think it was, I want to say it's Sweden or Switzerland. I always get the two mixed up. But they did a program where they noticed what areas more trafficked people were in. And instead of catching the girls, they caught the Johns. And they were prosecuting the Johns who were frequenting these areas that were known for trafficking, right? And they had a much better outcome. And the girls were able to like leave because they weren't profitable anymore, you know, like things like that, right? And so I think it's like looking at alternative ways, like because shame is obviously not working. Right. And people have been doing sex work as long as there have been people. And, you know, I think that people make their money the way they make their money. And I encourage them as long as they are consenting and it's what they want to do and they enjoy their work.
Yeah. And you can go on YouTube right now and find viral documentaries of downtown Dallas, right down the street from us, where people, like in the evenings, dudes are lined up in their cars and there's a cop right across the street and they can't do anything about it. Finding alternative ways, justice is always going to occur, you know. But we have, I think, at times with some of these things, drifted away from the conversation of justice around protecting humans, you know, and that's a big issue to tackle. But being able to embolden the right decisions so that we catch people who are doing the wrong things is a huge conversation for our society moving forward.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm trying to piece together some of the ideas around that because there's obviously the aspect of like people are going to do what they're going to do and that profession isn't going to go away and the demand for it isn't going to go away, but making sure that we're catching people who could be doing really treacherous things is extremely important. And the statistics show it's like the ones that are doing the treacherous stuff, they could have been caught for one of many other treacherous things that they were involved in. And they're not getting caught.
No, yeah. And, you know, I think the thing is treacherous people are going to do treacherous things. Yeah. And like you said, there's a million other things they could have gotten in trouble for that they didn't, that people just turned a blind eye to. Yeah. And so, you know, I think that's the thing is we do have to see the human in the work, right? You know, like this is just isn't an object. Like she's objectifying herself for money, but which one of us doesn't, right? You know, like if I'm on here doing a podcast, you know, like I'm obviously like selling my personality, you know, for the internet, right? You know, and so like everybody in some way or another sells their mind or their body for money.
Yeah, capitalism, baby.
It's capitalism, right? You know, so it's like, you know, who is anyone else to judge when someone else does it, right? Because that is a human being, that is a person. She has feelings, he has feelings, they have feelings, you know, like they are real people. And so we need to be looking at the people that are doing the wrong so that no matter what job you do, it's safe. I think that factory workers should be just as safe as sex workers. You know, I think that lawyers should have just as safe as a working space as porn stars. You know, I think that everybody should be safe. And I think decriminalizing it so that they can have safe spaces, so that they can have testing, so that they can have spaces where, like, if something were to happen to them, someone's there, you know, like really working in a space where, like, we create safer environments rather than trying to criminalize something that we can't stop.
It's an interesting conversation, too, because you could look at something like marijuana. That was largely legalized in recent years. And you had made the point, it's like treacherous people are going to do treacherous things. There are still areas and states where it is legal, where they're still doing illegal things with it. And if you wandered onto their property, you're going to disappear. So I think part of the bigger conversation isn't so much a fear of what's legal, what's not, but most importantly around drawing the light and shining the light on people who are always going to do the treacherous side of things anyway, because it's not about whether or not it's easy or hard. It's about them wanting to do bad things.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, there just are a lot of people around who walk around like that. It's not the vast majority, but there are enough, and we've seen it in recent times on an uptrend because I think they're emboldened lately.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is because we don't have systems like that set up. So it's a double-edged sword. It's like, what do you do? All we really can do is talk about it and keep an open mind and see how time evolves. But
yeah, and I think also create those safe spaces. I think we have, as therapists, this amazing opportunity to create spaces where people can come to us and they can talk about, you know, if you're a woman who does full service sex work and you're like, hey, I got raped. Let's talk about it, girl. You know, like, I'm not going to judge you. You know, I'm not going to be like, oh, if you haven't put yourself in that situation, or how can you rape somebody, you know, if they're paying for it, or, you know, whatever. That's all possible. You know, no is no. And so, like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you experienced. Let's talk about the aftermath of that. Like, you know, and like give them a safe space. And like, as therapists and me as a therapist, what I want to do is create that space for them to talk about anything that's going on with them, you know, and to know that they're not going to be judged in this space, that this space is safe.
yeah. What city is your practice in?
It's technically in Dallas, but I'm fully virtual.
Okay.
And so like I take clients from all over Texas. I don't do in-person currently.
Gotcha.
When I am going to start offering the ketamine sessions, I will be offering spaces for them to be in person. But right now I'm fully virtual.
Yeah. Cool. We'll plug this again, right, in the socials, but where, if they were interested in what you're talking about, where could they find your intakes and things like that to send you some?
Yeah, so intakes? It's www.prismpathwellness.com. And, you know, you can email me there, and we can set up a consultation. I'm big on consultations. So like, you know, I want to make sure that we're a good fit. I don't want people wasting money if we're not a good fit. Right. So do a free 50-minute consultation, and then we just kind of see where we go from there. I work with individuals. I work with couples. I work with thruples. I work with, polycules, you know, so like I work with kind of everything. And
how high do the terms go?
Polycule is kind of like the highest term, but like, you know, I typically keep it like no more than 5, because then it's a little bit difficult because I have to like lengthen the appointments.
Is it 4 or 5 where you would start using the term polycule?
I think polycule is anything more than 2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So your polycule is anything more than 2.
Yeah. That's good to know. I mean, you know, I asked mostly from like a quasi-humorous standpoint of like, what do we keep track up to 10? Like,
yeah, no, it's anything outside of 2, right? Like the moment you move outside of like the traditional idea of a relationship, then it's a polycule.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
What would you say to the haters?
You know what?
Fuck 'em.
Honestly, you know, I actually don't mind haters. You know, I mean, I feel like when you got haters, you're doing something right, right? And maybe when you have haters, you're doing something wrong. So I think whenever I have somebody who's a hater towards me, it gives me space to explore, right? Like, are you hating me because you want to be doing what I'm doing, or because what I'm doing makes you feel unsafe or uncomfortable, and is that unsafe, uncomfortable coming from you, or is it coming from me? You know, is there something that I'm doing that I need to explore that maybe I need to do better, or are you just hating because like you don't like the content that I'm putting out, or you don't like me talking about these kinds of things because it makes you question yourself, right? I think it's Cat Williams. It's like, if you don't have haters, you're not doing something right. You know, he's like, by the end of the summer, I want to have 5 more haters, right? But I think having a hater is a space to explore myself, right? And to explore them, right? Like, where is this coming from? And if it's coming from me, then that gives me space to grow.
Yeah, I think with topics like mental health and any expression of it, what we've found with our social media aspects is a lot of times the comments that can get a little bit spicy, right? One, it's easy not to take them personally, and then to interact with them is always typically with the social media side. Although it does give an aspect on the social side to look at ourselves and like, hey, what was that topic, and what's the expression of that topic over the course of that episode? But there is we get a lot of comments where it's like, oh, we definitely struck a chord that person didn't like being reflected, and that's okay. We hope that you would just keep coming and tuning in, so that we could trigger you some more, so that you might get some support. I mean, we're here to poke the bear.
Yeah, absolutely. Figure out in yourself like why you're triggered, right? You know, I think the most like hater comment I think I get the most is like, you know, oh, people are using poly as just a reason to be a slut or to sleep around. And I'm like, who needs a reason, right? Like, who needs an excuse, you know? Like, I'm a grown adult. Like, whoever I want to give my body to, that's my choice, right? Like, I don't need an excuse. There was nothing ever keeping me from doing it before, right? You know, even when I was a person who was still practicing monogamy, like, if I made an agreement with somebody that we were going to be exclusive, that didn't bind me. Like, obviously cheating still happens, right? And so, like, it wasn't like, oh, once you do it, there's a chastity belt and you can't sleep around, you know? It's like, no, people still do it, you know? So, like, there was nothing ever keeping me from sleeping around, right? Like, the only thing is, like, my choice, right? And so, like, I think that's the most, like, hater comment, I guess. Like, oh, you're just using it as an excuse to sleep around. Like, when did I ever need an excuse? It's my body.
Yeah.
Like,
Which just, I mean, even the ways, like, people would never say these things to someone's face. Number one, they'd be too terrified to say it, but that's also a really good indicator to just keep your mouth shut if you don't understand it. If you're going to say something hurtful, it's better not to say anything at all. We teach our 5-year-olds this concept.
Or get curious, man. Like, just ask me. Like, you know, be like, oh, did you feel comfortable, like, sleeping with that many people before? Like, you know, no, actually I didn't, you know, because I felt like I had these, like, good girl politics and purity culture that I had to work through on my own, you know, and, but at the same time, like, has it been freeing? Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, so you can get a completely different answer to that question if you just are more curious rather than judgmental.
Yeah, yeah. You may make a friend.
Absolutely.
You know, so, you know, it's like, it's funny too. It's like some of the most hurtful things people say are always just like a reflection of how, right? Like the way they see the world for the way they are, right? And it's like, what? So do you want to be a slut? Is that why you're bringing this up? We can talk about it if you want a friend.
Let that slut flag fly.
Yeah, hopefully that's not a word we get flagged for here on the social medias.
Absolutely.
So I have a question that I ask everybody when they're a first-time guest on the show. I'm just going to toss it out. You go with whatever your gut tells you. If we're going to build a mental health amusement park and you got to build a ride there, what would the ride be called? What would it do? What color would it be?
Ooh, a mental health one. Maybe it'd be more like a game.
Okay.
Right? Like, maybe like one of the carnival games, I think, would be one of the things, right? And it's like, go through your feelings and needs. And it's like, as you identify them, you get the bigger toy, right? You know, it's like, and eventually you get the really big toy if you do a good job. I think mine's more of like in a game kind of situation, right? Like, can you get the levels through?
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, so a carnival game style.
Yeah, like, you identified your feelings. Now identify your needs.
That one gets you the big stuffy.
Ding, you're right. You're correct. You needed reassurance.
Nice. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, and then hug that little stuffy for a couple days a week.
Yeah, absolutely. Be like, oh, I got the reassurance I needed. That's so wonderful.
Any last kind of takeaways that, while we have a captive audience here, that you would want to make sure that you share with just those who relate to what you're sharing? Yeah. Even those who are going to hate on it, who cares? Yeah,
I feel like for those who don't relate, get curious, right? Like, get curious, ask questions, but be respectful, right? Like, I think that anytime we have anything that feels outside of like the norm or the heteronormative ideas of love and relationships, right? Like, people tend to boil it down to sex, right? You know, it's like, you know, I've heard people ask really awful things to queer people, like, well, who's the boy and who's the girl? And it's like, neither, because that's the point, right? You know, and it's like, you know, or how do y'all do that? Like, who's the top, who's the bottom? And it's like, it's none of your business. You would never ask a heterosexual couple that, you know? And so, like, get curious in a respectful way and, like, ask, can you ask questions? Somebody may not be in a place to, like, I'm trying to listen to the concert. I don't want to answer your question about my relationships, you know, like, ask if that's okay. Ask if you can ask questions, you know, get curious about things instead of getting judgmental, right? And you might find out some things that help you grow even as a monogamous person, right? And I think for people who are, you know, in poly and kink and sex workers, like, you know, seek out people who understand you, seek out people who want you, right? You know, like, if you're looking for a mental health therapist, like, it'd be like, oh, I know some things, right? But no, I get somebody who, like, specializes in the thing that you want to talk about, who's already educated, who's looking for clients like you, who wants clients like you, right? Not just, you're just another appointment on the book.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and I think so many of us have like specializations that we're really passionate about, you know, like with addiction, right? Like if I had somebody who's like, oh, I know some stuff about addiction, like you're not the person I'm going to. I want to go to the person like that's their passion, right? That's the thing that like wakes them up in the morning, right? And like that's the thing that they want to be known for. That's the person I want to go to, you know? So it's like as much passion as you have about being who you are, find the person who has the passion of seeing that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. You'll get to the work a lot quicker too if it's targeted like that with somebody who isn't burnt out on working with those things or doesn't quite know all the terms and the ways that they impact the individual. It's like work with the person who's done the education.
Yeah, and also as a clinician, be humble, right? You know, like I'm a woman of color, but we're not a monolith. I don't understand every woman of color's experience. And even I'm Black and Puerto Rican, and even as a Black woman, you know, I was raised in Black culture. I can't truly, on an experiential level, understand the experience of a dark-skinned Black woman. You know, even though I'm Black, I'm ambiguously brown, right? You know, I can't understand the lived experience of a Muslim woman, right? And so that's something that the humility I come with, like, hey, I understand these things, but there's going to be a lot of things I don't understand because we don't have the same lived experience. And coming to that with humility, I think is such a big deal as a clinician.
Yeah, especially if it's like the thing that brings you the distress is something that I do specialize in, but then the blanks can be filled in because you're the expert of your life. And I've made it very clear that this is a space to share those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like asking, how can I ask you questions if I don't understand?
Right.
How can I ask for clarification if I don't understand in a way that doesn't feel like you're teaching me?
Yeah. And it leaves space too, because it's like, as a dude, I'm going to be everybody in their own unconscious process. Going to be everybody's dad, brother, boyfriend, husband, right? That's going to get projected as you're going to be everybody's mom, girlfriend, sister, wife, and all that kind of stuff. By having those conversations openly, it leaves the space for the specialties.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's the thing. It's like always come with humility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, we really appreciate you coming on and just sharing some of these expertise. I know there's many things that you work with and that are going to continue to work with, and we'll be connecting with you in the community. I imagine it's not your last time joining us here.
Yeah, for sure.
We're all about the things that people don't want to talk about. I view myself as taking a very journalistic approach a lot of times with this. I just want to chat. It's like I want to know more about what you're up to, and I'm glad you were willing to come on and talk about things that may make some people feel uncomfortable. I think it's important. There are clinicians out here working with everything, and we want to talk to them on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such an important thing, and to really get people out there who can do this, and maybe people who watch the show who are like, oh, finally somebody who understands, or maybe it gives them a better understanding of themselves, like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know you could do that. Nobody told me that. What? So I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, because I think even with some of these topics, as much as it's been in the pop culture, there are plenty of people who still don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And the only thing that they know about it is that they've been told to be afraid of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, come on, you don't have to be afraid of a concept or idea. You just have to have the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to adopt it just because you know about it.
Right.
You could just know about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's good to know things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
Cool. Yeah. Do you want to plug your information one last time for those who maybe popped on at the end here?
Yeah, if anybody's wanting to do any sessions with me, or you're looking for somebody who specializes in non-traditional clients, it's www.prismpathwellness.com. And just hit me up and we'll get you scheduled.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Iris Muscarella, LPC associate. You can reach her at those websites and in those ways to get appointments set up if you're related to the information that she was sharing here today. We break the cycle here every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I'd like you to remember, we're not just a podcast. We're a therapeutic network. We work with others in their therapy practices to refer over to them. So if you're ever needing support, we can get you connected with the therapists in our community, and you can always reach out to us here. Our location is in Hurst, Texas, and we can work with you if you're struggling with any type of addictions or have a loved one who is. We'll see you here next Thursday. Hit the like and subscribe button if you like what we're doing here, so you are updated on all the stuff that we do. But we love you, and we'll see you next week. Take care.